I'm so happy to be here this morning with you all, and it's such an honor to be with such a marvelous group of people that are in this room at the moment. I think this is sort of an auspicious occasion or moment or day. We have been in this one-room Zen Center. Someone once called it the Right Here, Right Now Zen Center. We've been in this one-room Zen Center for 8.5 years, and we have grown up here, kind of like a one-room schoolhouse, and everything has gone on in this room. We've had probably over 20 7-day retreats here. We've had hula concerts here. We've had classes. We've had meetings. We've had Tai Chi, martial arts. I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of things. Yoga. Arguments. Fights. Laughter. Crying. Anxiety. Love. It's all been here. 8.5 years. And we've grown up here. And we're about ready to move to a new home. So, I feel moved. So we were meeting in the gem circle about a month ago, starting to plan the direct mailer, which you may have received in the mail. We call the New Home Campaign, to raise some money to move into our new home a few doors down at 46 Lake Street. And we were brainstorming, as we do in the gem circle, about how are we going to do this direct mail campaign, and what should we include in the mailer to everyone. Someone said, well, let's send them pens. We get to have the name of the Zen Center on the pen. And we thought, oh, that's not very, that's not such a good idea. So then we kept coming up with ideas, and then someone came up with the idea, let's send them a bumper sticker. And then I thought, oh, we could, yeah, great, let's have a bumper sticker, and we could say, honk if you don't exist. And we had a good laugh about that, we were laughing, and it was really funny, And then we went home, and I thought about it for a week, and sometimes it's good to think about things before you do them, and give it a little time and space to, okay, honk if you don't exist. Is that really what we want to send out to everyone? It's a little too cute, and it kind of feels like a Zen in-joke, And I don't think that's really what we or what we want to communicate. So then I thought, oh, why don't we do this, which we sent out, seeing wholeness where there is division. That feels more like who we are, who we aspire to be. And so if you don't have one of these, you can have one. We have plenty of them. And so when I thought about the talk I was going to give this morning, and this will be the last talk I give here in this space before we move, put my artwork up, and Keijo said I should talk about my art, which I never do, because it feels like a real indulgence to talk about my art. And I have never really integrated my art with my Zen practice. And so I promised Keijo that I would talk about it, and I will get around to it before the talk is over. So kind of everything came together for me with the art and this talk and everything. So, and I thought, well, I'm turning 70 this week. What do I want to talk about? I want to talk about the Bodhisattva vow. There wasn't it wasn't hard to think about what I want to talk about. That's the most important thing, I think, to talk about. I'm going to talk about it this morning. The Buddha was an extraordinary spiritual teacher, and one of the first things he did in his teaching, is really his first teaching, he looked around and said, life is suffering. And as you get older, this will be painfully apparent. Life is suffering. You have a body. It's getting older. You get sick. Your joints start squeaking. I knew I was something had changed when I started in my mid-50s. I go to the gym and all the men would be sitting in the locker room talking about their knees and hips. Something's changing. I didn't used to talk about my knees and hips, but as you get older, you do. So if you have a body, you're going to suffer. Your body's going to suffer. And you're going to lose friends. The older you get, the more you're going to lose. You're going to have losses. You're going to fail at things. You're going to suffer. And the most extraordinary thing about the Buddha's teaching was that he said something as obvious as the truth about suffering. He said something that's also obvious that is not apparent to us unless we really look at it very carefully, is that we all self-identify. We have a self, me and mine, and this me is how I define me as myself, my body, my family, my ethnicity, my whatever, my group, my religion, my party, my nation. And there's nothing particularly the matter with that, except we're going to suffer because that identity is not whole. And the Buddha said, if we would actually see that our identity is whole, we could be liberated from the suffering. He said, this is extraordinary teaching. And if anything is left out, if any part, any person, anything, any plant, any tree, any blade of grass, human being, group, prisoner, homeless person, crazy person, any part is left out of who we are, then the wholeness does not hold. So essentially what the Buddha was saying is we suffer because who we think we are is just way too small. And you can see the results in our world that's always been like this. There's hatred, violence, bigotry, war, guns, violence, chaos. So, Zen is part of a school called Mahayana Buddhism. Mahayana means the large vehicle. And the spirit and the sense of Mahayana Buddhism is that in this path of practice, we have a larger vision of the world. What's a larger possibility? We can imagine being a larger self that belongs to all of this world. Not part of it, but all of it. That includes all of it. That requires quite a bit of imagination to have that larger vision. To see others as yourself. That's an act of imagination. The ideal of this self in Mahayana Buddhism is called the Bodhisattva. It is both an archetype of who you and I are, in the most genuine, whole sense, who you and I are, but it's also spoken of in very large cosmic and imaginary mythological terms. In the sutras, in huge cosmic realms of time that require quite a bit of imagination to take in. So is the Bodhisattva me? Is it out there? Is it in here? It's everywhere. The Bodhisattvas are out there. They're beings, that protectors in all time and space, and they're also here. They're me, you. Bodhisattvas have enormous amount of energy. They're kind of like the energy bunnies of Buddhism. They just keep going. They have joy, they're joyful, they have energy, they have lots of discipline, they love to be of service, they're uplifted, they're cheerful. And they're motivated by pure love. When they look out in the world, they just see beautiful Buddhas. They see beautiful beings everywhere. Everywhere is a beautiful being. It's kind of like in nonviolent communication when we say, if you wear giraffe ears, all you hear is please and thank you. Well, when Bodhisattvas look out in the world, all they see is lovely human beings. And so when one of these beings in trouble, a bodhisattva feels that trouble and wants to be of service, if one can, to relieve that suffering. Because if you're suffering, you want to relieve your suffering. Just like if someone else is suffering, you would, if you see them as yourself, then you would naturally want to relieve their suffering. And you don't think of that as some sacrifice you're doing, because you don't think of it as a sacrifice when you take care of yourself. So why would it be a sacrifice when you take care of somebody else? Bodhisattvas don't think they're sacrificing anything. They don't think of themselves as extraordinary or loving or particularly unusual. They appear as quite ordinary human beings for the most part. But what bodhisattvas know, without a doubt, is that the best thing, and really the only thing, is to try to be of service, to save all sentient beings. And that this vow it's really the most important matter, and there's really no alternative to it, and it's impossible. We chanted it this morning. If you've been around the Zen Center for any of these 8.5 years, you've chanted this Bodhisattva vow quite a few times. We chant it in our services. Every time we do a service, we dedicate the merits to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, wherever they are in the 10 directions. We give away the merit that we always are giving merit. And we didn't take a survey or a poll to ask your permission if you wanted to take the Bodhisattva vow. We didn't say, would you like to save all sentient beings? Here, check here if you'd like to do that. We didn't do that. We just handed you a sutra book or a piece of paper and said, here, chant that. And you chanted it. So you've actually taken the vow. You might want to think about that a little bit. And we chanted it this morning. And we chant it because it's the sane thing to do. It's really, in a materialistic culture, it doesn't make any sense. But from the point of view of really seeing what is here, the only thing to really do to relieve suffering and to be whole is to take this vow really to our heart and see that this is really, if I want to be genuinely myself, this is the way to do it. And the Buddha actually told me how to do it. He laid out a path. We have precepts. We have what are called the 6 paramitas. They're sometimes called the 6 perfections. And again, they're also impossible. It's not possible to do them perfectly. Nobody does. And it's not possible to save all sentient beings, but that doesn't stop us from taking that vow. And it doesn't stop us from being inspired by the largeness of that vow and the possibility of how large we can be when we take it. The thing that I have, we have created the foundation classes on mindfulness where we're teaching meditation, and to be sustainable as a Zen Center, from the early years when we started here, it was apparent to me that we needed to make these practices accessible to people in a consumer culture. We live in a consumer culture. Everything is being consumed. We're being consumed. And that's a very fine line to walk, to actually teach meditation in this kind of a culture, because it's very easy for people to say, oh, so what's the goal of meditation? Yeah, the goal is to relieve stress. That's what people say. And then people will critique mindfulness and say, well, that doesn't do it. There's other things that I relieve more stress by going to the gym than I do sitting meditation here. So if there's a goal to meditation, in the end, it's not going to work. And it's actually not going to make much sense. And you could rightfully criticize that meditation doesn't achieve whatever goal you think it's supposed to do. So it's not a materialistic thing, so it's a fine line we're walking, because we want to make these teachings accessible to people that are suffering all kinds of anxiety, and we know that mindfulness can help people. But what it helps us do, and there are certainly, we could say there are things that we can work with stress and manage stress and anxiety and various things that we suffer with through meditation. But I think really the heart of the matter, again, is it, and I've seen this over the years, and it's something that I see over and over again, is that when people do this practice regularly, they start to become more genuinely themselves. And you see people open. People start to open their hearts, and it's just a wonderful thing to see. And I've seen it in many of you, and I see it in myself and Sensei. And I think that's the point. It's a matter of the heart, opening the heart, our sad and tender heart, and being willing to be genuine and brave and vulnerable, and show up here with all our warts and issues and whatnot. And that's ironically the way to be whole, is to show up here with this genuine desire to wake up, and when you see how this works, you see that you absolutely cannot wake up without everyone else waking up. It's not possible. I can't wake up if you don't wake up. Your waking up is my waking up. The Buddha said, when he was enlightened, he said, how marvelous, I and all sentient beings wake up simultaneously. That's the Bodhisattva vow. And then there's a whole range of teachings that come from once we take this vow to heart and we really see why it is important. Then we can work on being of service more skillfully in the world to relieve suffering. Let's see. Anyone have any thoughts? I'm going to say some stuff about my art, but before I do, I thought maybe we could have any thoughts about what I've said so far. I said quite a bit, so might want to you want to, here, hang on. Okay, I want to move this. He has a question.
Well, now I feel no pressure. Now I feel no pressure. Thank you. I think I forgot what I was going to say. So in taking the vow, it's kind of overwhelming. It's kind of overwhelming. It's kind of overwhelming to make that vow. How do you find the balance of being gentle with yourself, but still firm enough to go forward?
That's a very good question, and I think how this vow comes about is it can quite organically through the practice of opening the heart. So you start to see that the self that you've thought you were is too small and it's too thin and it's causing a lot of suffering. And when you start to deconstruct that through practice at a very organic level, what takes its place is gentleness and kindness. It just takes its place. And the Bodhisattva vow, the reason why it doesn't feel like a sacrifice is because you're actually taking care of yourself. So there's no sense of idiot compassion taking place here where you go out and try to sacrifice or you be a martyr of some kind to save all sentient beings. You're actually taking care of yourself is taking care of others, and taking care of others is taking care of yourself. So you have to do both. You have to take care of yourself, and if you don't love yourself, you can't love others. If you're not, the only way to develop true affection for this world and its insanity is to be with your own, with kindness and love. And I think they both work together. So this question often comes up. People think compassion is impossible and too difficult, but it's actually the easiest thing to do if we see what it is. It's much harder to be selfish and narrow and small, and it's a much harder path. So, and the other beautiful thing that we're starting to really see clearly with the help of Joan Halifax Roshi and others, and Shishin and Christine and others, and Pat. Where's Pat? Where are you? Oh, I'm sorry. Is this grace process that Joan Halifax Roshi has developed, that we really start to appreciate that the way to be resilient is through compassion. And this kind of flies in the face of we have a lot of assumptions about compassion, that if you're compassionate, people are going to walk all over you, you'd become a jellyfish, and you would just get manipulated by everyone. It's just the opposite. When you are working with others with an intention, and your empathy is connected with a compassionate, altruistic intention, you actually are very resilient, and you don't burn out. The idea of compassion and burnout is not accurate. I don't even think that we should use that term. There's burnout taking place. People definitely do burn out, but it's not because they're being compassionate. It's actually because they're losing track of their own compassion in the process of serving others. So I think this question comes up a lot when we talk about compassion. People say, well, how can I have to take care of myself, and if I was compassionate, I would lose track of my own care, and it's not like that at all. Actually, the more you practice this vow, the more you take care of yourself so that you can be of service to others. And it also comes about it's kind of a leap to just hear it flatly in a bald way like I'm saying this morning may be kind of shocking. And in fact, there's stories where when the Buddha gave this talks about the Bodhisattva vow to Arahats, a lot of them had heart attacks because they had to give up all their gadgets and things, and they just couldn't conceive of doing that. So it's kind of shocking, and yet at the same time, organically, I think again is the key. Through practice, you start to notice as you open your heart that you have an enormous sanity and richness in you. And you feel inspired by that you could be bigger as a result, that you have something to offer. It's the opposite of a poverty mentality. You actually feel like you're big enough to take the vow, and it brings an enormous kind of dignity to who you are as a human being. That's why the Buddha said it's the way to really relieve suffering. It's the way to be liberated. Shishin? You want to?
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure.
Thank you, Roshi, for your wonderful words. I was thinking about the grace process as you were talking. And I was thinking that when you said, this is first, it's you. And when we say, gather your attention, the grace, gather your attention, recall your intention, we're not talking about somebody else. We're not talking about the encounter yet. We're talking about gather your attention. Where are you? Breathe. Ground yourself. Recall your intention. What is it you want to do? Maybe you want to just keep your mouth shut. And then then attune to yourself. And then attune to the other. And consider what will serve. Yeah, it's very powerful. And I believe, the more I think about it, that the grace model is the Bodhisattva vow behaviorally enacted.
Could you speak more, clarify, saying that there's no goal to meditation? Because people meditate because they want something. They want to change. And so could you speak to that?
Yeah, so goals are useful, and people, almost everyone starts to practice because they want something out of it, and I think that's natural, and it's not to be, I'm not suggesting there's anything bad about that. What I'm saying, if that's absolutely the only reason why you're meditating, because you have a goal, then you're missing the meditation. Who we are is a process. And meditation is a process of how we are with ourselves. And if you set a goal out here to attain, then you lose track of yourself. If happiness is out here, then I lose track of what actually makes me happy here and now. And then all the things that lead to stress, I start to define as negative, so now I have to get rid of them. And I think it creates a kind of violence towards myself in the process of trying to reach the goal. In a relative sense, we all have goals and objectives, and there's nothing the matter with it. But when you're thinking of the larger spiritual path, I think that eventually that becomes problematic, because we say the path is the goal. Dogen Zenji says enlightenment is practice. Practice is enlightenment. The actual practice is a reward. So if you create an reward that's separate from what you're doing now, then that, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. The last thing I want to say about imagination, which will lead me into my artwork, is that it's really interesting that Dogen Zenji, if you've read any of Dogen, you will see that this is a man that had a very large imagination and vision of the Buddha Dharma. And he was really Dogen brought Chan, which is Chinese Zen, to Japan. He was the first generation teacher of Zen in Japan. He went to China, he found a teacher, and he brought it to Japan. And at the time that he was in Japan, the main practice in Japan was Tendai Buddhism, which is the Vajrayana form of Buddhism in Japan. And if you know anything about Vajrayana, it's quite flowery and baroque and full of imaginative beings. And that was what was being practiced in Japan at the time that Dogen was alive. And Dogen did not think he was doing Zen. He thought it was all one path, the Buddha Dharma. He didn't have a sectarian view of it at all. And he had a very large vision and imagination. And then when Dogen died, his teachings got put in a vault somewhere in a temple and didn't see the light of day for hundreds of years. And Zen went on its merry way, meanwhile, without him. and did what it did. There was a Zen school, there was a Soto school, a Rinzai school, and then there was a Pure Land school, and they got increasingly sectarian. Even the Zen schools got sectarian. It became, little details became really important to define which sect you were in. And it kind of lost the imagination. And there's an element of Zen which is kind of rigid that way, which I have almost all my life rebelled against. And there are many wonderful Zen centers that are not like that, but there's an element in the Zen path, in the Zen tradition, which is rigid and does not have imagination. It's basically the idea is just sit down and shut up, and sit, do shikantaza. And there's no room for imagination in that kind of path of practice. But then Zen rediscovered Dogen about 100 years ago, and now the Soto school embraces Dogen as the very best, which they have every right to do because he is quite extraordinary. So I think this notion of imagination is actually really important. I don't think it's possible to really embrace the Bodhisattva vow without some imagination. And most of my life, I've been an artist and I've been a Zen practitioner, and the two, never the twain shall meet. I have done art over here, and I've done my Zen practice here. My art has felt like an indulgence, and I feel kind of inadequate even talking about it. And I realized, because Keijo pushed me to do this, that I was going to she helped me pick out these paintings, and that I was going to try to weave it all together today. So my process of doing art, not always, but often when I start with my art, I start with wherever I'm at, which is often feeling inadequate, anxious, chaotic, and I start there. And I go down the rabbit hole, and I let whatever's here hang out, and it's often, sometimes it's anger, and it's destructive, and I destroy whatever I make, and I make something else, and I destroy that, and I'm in this soup of chaos, and then I try to make it out of the rabbit hole. Sometimes I make it out, and sometimes I don't. But when I do make it out, what I find is some kind of wholeness. And that is, that's satisfying to me when I find wholeness out of the chaos. And I trust that kind of wholeness because it came out of the chaos. If I just set out in the beginning to paint wholeness without all my stuff, my anxiety, my anger, my irritation, my messed upness, then I don't think I would trust the wholeness, and it would feel like fascism or something. It would just be order without chaos. I don't trust, because I think there's always chaos in order, and I find that in my own art, and that is something that that feels honest to me, and I trust that. The chaos is not always apparent, but it's fairly apparent in many of them. Some of them not, but. And so the first one I want to talk about is I did this series when I started the Zen Center in Hawaii. When did we start? 92. And by the way, June and me just celebrated our 31st wedding anniversary during this 18. We almost always have our wedding anniversary during a retreat. So we're now going to go on vacation and celebrate it for a week in Wisconsin. But so when I started painting, my spiritual path has been pretty windy, and I've gone off the path and come back on it. And I was painting when we started the Zen Center. I had been painting for about 10 years, pretty much nonstop, and was trying to make a living as a painter, which I didn't do. I failed miserably, but. And when we started the Zen Center, I stopped painting because it was too much to have students and run a Zen center and paint at the same time. So I actually stopped painting altogether. And for many years, I was dreaming. In my dreams, I would paint, but not in real life. So that's how separated my art became. I was in my dreams, but not in real life. And then about 6 years ago, so we were actually up at the place where we're going this week. We were doing a retreat, and I was doing practice of immediacy, and I had an iPad, and it's a beautiful place in Wisconsin on a river, and I started painting landscapes on my iPad, and I got so excited I didn't want to go back in and sit meditation at all. I just wanted to paint, So I came home and I told Sensei, I said, hey, I'm going to start painting again. I'm getting older, and I just don't want to give that up anymore. It brings me too much joy to create. So I started painting on a computer. I got a Wacom tablet, and I had a stylus because I didn't have room to paint with oils, and so this is the result. Is I started painting on a Wacom tablet, and one of the first series I did was this series called "Searching for the Ox," and I was. If in our tradition we have this series of 10 ox herding pictures, which are images that represent the path of enlightenment in practice. And the path starts, and they have poems that go with them. You may have seen them. And like the first one is searching for the ox, and the ox is the symbol of enlightenment. So you're searching for the ox, but the ox is out here, and you're here. And then slowly through the progression of images, you see that the ox is no longer separate. And there's one picture of the person catches the ox, and then the next one they're riding the ox home. They've tamed the ox, so now the ox is you. And then it progresses to the point where both you and the ox disappear, and there's just an Enso circle. And then the last image is some little Hotai kind of figure going into the marketplace with gift bestowing hands. So I was trying to do those 10 in the series, which I failed at. I couldn't actually do each one, so I didn't end up doing that. But I was trying to paint the ox as the symbol of enlightenment, but instead, what happened was, and I didn't realize this till just when I was trying to figure out how to talk about these even, that it doesn't feel to me like the symbol of enlightenment. It feels like something I have compassion for. So it feels like the Bodhisattva vow to me, and I didn't. It's not a symbol to me in the painting. It's something I feel. I feel like I have a sadness for, and that kind of empathic feeling about, and so that struck me that it wasn't really a symbol anymore for something out there that stands for enlightenment. The whole thing is enlightenment, just like the Bodhisattva vow is. So does that make sense, what I'm saying? So that kind of where that came from. And then all these are from different series that I've done, and I often use metaphors. A metaphor I like because it breathes and it gives me a lot of room to explore something from different angles. And it kind of anchors me. I kind of need a metaphor to have some kind of focus. Otherwise, I just get lost in the rabbit hole and I don't get back out. I did these Pamsula ones. If you have been around here, you know that people have Raksus. This is a very fancy one, but when you take the precepts here at the Zen Center, you sew your Raksu. And when you sew the Raksu in this tradition, we call the thread, one way of doing this is you ask your friends to send you material, clothing, or clothing that you might have had from someone you love that's passed away, your mother or your grandmother or somebody. And you collect these materials and then you sew your Raksu out of it so that when you're wearing the Raksu, these materials from the people you love are close to your heart. And we call this material Pamsula. And I called this series, I did about 10 or 12 in this series I called Pamsula. And the spirit of Pamsula is that, you know how the monks in Southeast Asia have saffron robes? The reason they have saffron robes is because traditionally the color of the cloth that was used to wrap people's bodies in the graveyards was saffron. And the monks would go to the graveyard and get this cloth which nobody wanted to even touch. No one would have anything to do with that. And they would go to the graveyard and they would take this cloth and they would take it back and they would sew their okesas with it. And so Pamsula has the spirit of taking something which has been rejected by everyone else and turning it to something rich and wonderful. And that's the spirit of Pamsula. So I did a series of those. Then I did a series on evolution that were pretty abstract. This one, that one over there. I like the metaphor of evolution. It feels to me like a very long, large, spacious time that I can't possibly understand. But again, I feel like it's part of how we, one of the practices called Dana Paramita of a Bodhisattva is the Dana, the Paramita of generosity. And if you really look carefully, as Shishin was saying, if we really look carefully at our own experience in the practice of meditation, you'll notice that, again, the self that you think you are, it's not yours. The body's not yours. This body has been given to you through hundreds and thousands of years of evolution and genes and your ancestors. You didn't create your head or your eyes or your ear or your arm. It's been given to you. And then if you look a little further, you'll notice something just really surprising at first discovery is that your breath is not yours. If you weren't breathing, you wouldn't be here. Your breath is given to you by the generosity of this planet. From trees, from bees, from birds, from oceans, from clouds. The breath is given to you. So that was part of what came up for me in the evolution series. I was just trying to enjoy this being in this vast expanse of time that I have no way of understanding. And then I did another series called Metamorphosis, which is the dragonfly and the butterfly over there. And I can't put that into words too well, but it felt to me, I like butterflies and I love dragonflies. They're just beautiful to paint or draw or look at. And they're, there's this notion of the butterfly coming out of the cocoon and transforming. So it's a metamorphosis. It was this and now it's that. And I feel that's the same thing about life as a metamorphosis. You're not the same body that you were when you were 5. We've morphed into adults, and we're morphing into old age, and then we're morphing into skeletons eventually. We're constantly changing. So that brought up this notion of change and patterns that connect, which are represented by those two paintings over there. And I realized that actually impermanence is a source of great joy and happiness for me. I know we don't always think of change as something we enjoy. We often don't. But if you really think about it at any length, you realize that we wouldn't be here without impermanence. We wouldn't be able to grow. We wouldn't be able to do anything. That impermanence is a real fact that we can't escape. And trying to escape it and trying to be permanent in any way is going to lead to lots of disappointment and suffering. So in this series, I just kind of embraced impermanence, and what came up for me is I love patterns. I love patterns when I'm visually looking at things and painting. I'm often doing patterns because It's the pattern is the way that I lace something together, or I sew it together, or I find the wholeness. And there can be a lot of parts, and yet the pattern, it comes together as a whole with all these parts. So that's the best I can say about it in words. And I think that's... Oh, and then the last one is this one. I did a couple, I did this a couple early on, about 4 or 5 years ago. I did a series of paintings. In this one, I called it The Seasons of Zen. I was thinking of the 5 Buddha families, and I was trying to do an image for each of the energies of the 5 Buddha families. And I think this one might be Padma. And I didn't succeed. Again, I didn't actually get all 5. There were a couple I just couldn't figure out how to do, but I did about 3 in them. I did one on Vajra, which is very wintry, and then I did this one, and I like how it came out. So that's my paintings, and that's about the best I can do with words. But maybe Christine.
Thank you for sharing that. It was really wonderful to hear. I've always enjoyed seeing your paintings. And when you started talking about the process of sort of going deep, and I mean, what came to me immediately was not knowing and bearing witness. So, and then there's loving action in a way. So to me it was, it may not resonate with you, but for me that was a really quick way that I understood the connection of how you're experiencing your art. Thank you.
Yeah, I think somehow it's important to get to the unconscious. I don't use that word a lot because it has some baggage, but to get to some awareness that is free of my knowing, because my knowing is limited. And for me, I can't access a deeper image or something that's satisfying to me without starting from a place of not knowing. And then if I get to something that is satisfying, then it feels, it confirms something that I'm able to trust the not knowing better, because actually something came out of it that I didn't, it was a discovery, it surprised me. And then I sort of say, oh, that's satisfying. Yeah. And sometimes I go down the rabbit hole, and I actually end up in the rabbit hole, and I leave that. And I usually, when I do a painting like that, I'll say, yeah, that's okay, and I'll leave it at that, because I wanted to express something about my world, or I'm pissed off about something, and I did a whole series of just black paintings a year and a half ago in the spring after Trump was elected. I just didn't want to paint with any color at all, and I was pissed off, and I just painted it. And I said, okay, that's what artists can do this. But I'm usually not very satisfied with that for very long, and I'll do a couple of pieces like that, and then I'll say, okay, I got it out of my system now. I don't really want to keep doing it.
You when you started off saying that your Zen practice and your painting were separate, at first I believed it, but I don't believe it anymore. And so it's because I see how you have a creative aspect of your life and you segregate that, but I don't think you can divide yourself from the wholeness. You are just as part of that as your Bardo series and the Buddhas that show up, and the intricacies, and the Indra's net, and it's all part of the texture of your life and the Zen. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
This is just a comment about some pictures that aren't up here. You had a series with either Coyote or Wolf, which, and they were in maybe churches, maybe alleyways, hidden figures. I mean, now I'm into the metaphor. And I really loved them. In fact, I think I gave you a photo and said, let's do something with that. I can't remember what it was anymore, but I love them because they were, for me, I like abstraction. These weren't so abstract. They were conceptually abstract and very dark and yet moving. Nobody else maybe knows which ones you do.
Well, I know those pieces too. And this is such a joyful exhibition. And the complexity of choosing works to be in an installation without rooms to do a proper retrospective, that was the challenge of this installation. And all of this work is so clear and joyful, crisp. I think what Laurie said nailed it in terms of the whole, the overall, and the parts. These are really fun to look at. And they're hard to... That one over there is the furthest from me. The one to the right of the bathroom is part of this series, right? Yeah. But these really require close inspection. And so I hope all of you take time. But I think, aside from the joyful color, they really are a trip. They're a trip. And, you know, your description of the rabbit hole is a fabulous revelation, I think, to folks who may not be painters. You know, that not knowing, that rabbit hole. But there's so many ways to look at each of these pieces. There's a lot of longevity here. Because take the one behind you, the bigger one. One could look at the bubbles. I mean, I'm seeing bubbles from where I'm sitting right now, but then come back to the structure that holds you, and then go back into what you don't know, what you're unsure about. So the discoveries that continue to unfold within this beautifully balanced piece, you know, there are different ways to look at these. Up close, from a distance, for structure, for texture, for color, for reference, bubbles, fur, whatever, you know, vines on the viaduct, I assume I'm seeing, right? Am I seeing vines? Am I seeing a viaduct with...
You're seeing tree, branches.
Yeah. You know, they're so full of everything. Yeah. The L. Right, the L, right. So I'll pass this on, but these really do require different focus points. In other words, for the viewer to get up close and then stand back and then get up close again and stand back, and for the viewer to move, to be able to move within the layers. It's a trip.
Anybody else? The Standing Watch series I did, that Shishin's talking about. The first one I did was the sense of it was a coyote in a church that had broken down. It was all, it was like falling apart, and I just had this vision of animals left over after the city is falling apart. The animals are still here, coyotes are still here, but we've ruined it. And so it was kind of dark. It was a dark vision of the urban, so I can get quite dark.
And the photo that I gave you, what was that? Do you remember?
It was a coyote going through some kind of room that looked kind of like a church.
Mine didn't have the coyote. Mine was the.
Oh,
structure.
it was this columns and stuff, and then I put the coyote in it. Yeah. Was that a photograph you took? Uh-huh. So if that's it, I think we could close for the day. Thank you so much for coming, and
Thank you.
thank you. So.